America's, yeah.
One thank you.
That's medium size.
This is probably...
Before visiting America, many Europeans think they already know exactly what to expect about America. They've watched Hollywood movies, seen countless videos online, read the headlines, and over the years many have formed strong opinions about what everyday life in the United States must be like. Some expect endless traffic, others imagine giant pickup trucks, oversized meals, and cities that never sleep. Some even believe certain parts of American life would be frustrating, or simply not for them. But then something unexpected happens. They actually visit. What begins as a holiday quickly turns into something else, because many of the things they expected to dislike become some of the things they end up loving the most. Today, we're counting down 10 things many European visitors thought they'd hate about America, but ended up loving after experiencing them for themselves. Some of these might surprise you. 10. Driving everywhere. For many Europeans, one of the biggest concerns before visiting America wasn't the food or the weather. It was the driving. Back home, many people are used to trains, trams, buses, and city centres where almost everything is within walking distance. So when they learned that many Americans drive almost everywhere, some wondered if it would become exhausting. The idea of needing a car just to visit a supermarket, pick up coffee, or explore a nearby town initially sounded inconvenient. Then they arrived. For many visitors, everything changed the moment they picked up their rental car. The roads felt wide and easy to navigate. Parking was often much simpler than they had expected. And before long, driving stopped feeling like a chore. It became part of the adventure. Road trips turned into unforgettable memories. Instead of rushing to catch the next train or checking transport schedules, they could simply decide where to go. A national park in the morning, a small roadside diner for lunch, a scenic overlook they had never planned to visit. Some of their favourite memories came from places they hadn't even intended to stop. Many European tourists later admitted that having a car gave them a level of freedom they hadn't expected. If they spotted an interesting small town, they could pull over. If someone recommended a hidden beach, they could simply drive there. If they wanted to watch the sunset from a mountain viewpoint, nothing was stopping them. The journey itself became just as enjoyable as the destination. Long stretches of open highway, changing landscapes, music playing through the speakers, and the excitement of not knowing what they might discover around the next corner. By the end of the trip, many visitors realized something surprising. The thing they had worried about before arriving had become one of the highlights of their entire vacation. Driving wasn't just transportation, it became part of the American experience. And while many Europeans ended up loving life on the open road, the next surprise was something they noticed almost immediately. The very first time they ordered a drink. 9. Ice in every drink. After getting used to driving across America, many European visitors encountered another surprise. This one wasn't on the highways. It wasn't inside a national park. It happened the moment they sat down at a restaurant. They ordered a soft drink, and before they even took the first sip, the glass arrived almost completely filled with ice. For many Europeans, it was genuinely unexpected. Some laughed and wondered if they had only received half a drink. Others joked that Americans seemed to love ice almost as much as the drinks themselves. At first, it felt excessive. Many visitors admitted they even asked for less ice during their first few days. After all, in many parts of Europe, drinks are often served with only a few cubes, or sometimes no ice at all. But as the trip continued, something changed. Long afternoons exploring cities, road trips through the summer heat, hours spent walking around theme parks, beaches, and downtown streets. Suddenly, that ice-cold drink became incredibly refreshing. Instead of avoiding the ice, many visitors started looking forward to it. They realized there was something satisfying about taking a break from the heat and enjoying a drink that stayed cold until the very last sip. By the end of the vacation, it had quietly become part of their daily routine. Then they flew home. The first time they ordered a drink back in Europe, some couldn't help but notice the difference. Fewer ice cubes, sometimes none at all. And many found themselves thinking, I actually miss those giant American drinks. It wasn't really about the ice itself. It was about the comfort it brought after a long day of exploring. One of those tiny details they never expected to appreciate until they experienced it for themselves. And while ice-cold drinks won over many European visitors, the next surprise made an even bigger impression. Because it wasn't about what was inside the glass, it was about how comfortable almost every building felt, no matter how hot it was outside. 8. Air conditioning everywhere.
So it's blazing hot outside. I'm going to step into this establishment and it's chilly. It's hot outside.
After discovering that Americans seem to love ice in every drink, many European visitors noticed something else. No matter where they went, it felt cool. Step inside a shopping mall. Cool air. Walk into a supermarket. Cool air. Check into a hotel. Cool air. Even after spending hours outside on a hot summer afternoon, the moment they walked indoors, there was instant relief. For many Europeans, this was completely different from what they were used to back home. Some even joked that Americans treated air conditioning like a national treasure. At first, it almost felt unnecessary. A few visitors laughed about bringing a light jacket into restaurants because they thought it was so cold. Others wondered why the temperature seemed the same no matter where they went. But after a few days, especially during the middle of summer, their opinions slowly began to change. After walking through busy city streets under the hot sun, or spending the afternoon exploring parks, attractions, and neighborhoods, stepping into a cool building suddenly felt amazing. That blast of cold air wasn't just comfortable, it became something they actually looked forward to. Many visitors said they never realized how refreshing it could be until they experienced it day after day. Whether they were shopping, eating dinner, watching a movie, or simply taking a short break from sightseeing, the cool indoor spaces made long travel days much more enjoyable. By the end of the trip, something unexpected had happened. The same air conditioning they had laughed about during their first few days had become one of the things they appreciated the most. Then they returned home. During the next warm summer day, some found themselves walking into a shop, only to realize it wasn't nearly as cool as they remembered in America. And many couldn't help but smile, thinking back to those icy restaurants, hotels, and shopping centers they once thought were overdoing it. Sometimes, the things that seem unusual at first become the comforts you miss the most. And while cool buildings made hot days much easier, the next surprise waiting for many European visitors was sitting outside in parking lots all across America. At first, they thought these vehicles were far too big. But after seeing how Americans actually used them, many completely changed their minds. 7. Big pickup trucks. After getting used to America's air-conditioned buildings, many European visitors noticed something else that seemed impossible to ignore. The trucks. They were everywhere. Outside supermarkets, in hotel parking lots, on country roads, even in the middle of busy cities. For many Europeans, their first reaction was simple. Why are they so big? Back home, smaller cars are much more common. Narrow streets, compact parking spaces, and higher fuel prices often make large vehicles less practical. So before arriving in America, many assumed pickup trucks were simply oversized, or bought more for appearance than anything else. But after spending time in the United States, many visitors began to see them differently. They watched contractors loading equipment into the truck bed before heading to work. They saw families packing camping gear for weekend trips. Others noticed people towing boats, trailers, or RVs with ease. In farming communities and smaller towns, pickups weren't unusual at all. They were simply part of everyday life. For many tourists, it was the first time they realized just how versatile these vehicles could be. Some even had the chance to ride in one. What had looked enormous from the outside suddenly felt surprisingly comfortable inside. The higher seating position offered a clear view of the road. There was plenty of room for passengers, and on long drives, many admitted they were more comfortable than they had expected. By the end of the trip, many visitors still preferred the smaller cars they drove back home, but they also understood something they hadn't before. In a country with long highways, wide roads, outdoor lifestyles, and vast distances, a pickup truck often made perfect sense. It wasn't just about size, it was about practicality. The vehicles they once laughed at had become something they understood, and for many European visitors, that completely changed the way they looked at them. But while America's pickup trucks challenged their expectations, the next surprise was something much more personal. It wasn't parked in a driveway. It happened every time they walked into a cafe, restaurant, or local shop. It was the people. 6. Friendly strangers. After seeing why Americans loved their pickup trucks, many European visitors discovered that one of the biggest surprises had nothing to do with cars at all. It was the people. Before arriving in the United States, many Europeans had heard that Americans were incredibly friendly. Some thought it sounded exaggerated. Others assumed the smiles and small talk would feel forced or insincere. After all, in many parts of Europe, it's perfectly normal to keep to yourself in public. You might sit next to someone on a train without saying a word, walk into a cafe, order your coffee, and leave without much conversation. It's simply a different social culture. So when many visitors arrived in America, they weren't expecting complete strangers to start talking to them. But it happened again, and again, and again. Someone complimented their shoes while they were shopping. A cashier asked how their vacation was going. Another customer overheard their accent and became curious about where they were from. Waiting in line suddenly turned into a conversation. Ordering coffee became an opportunity to exchange travel tips. Even asking for directions often led to recommendations for restaurants, attractions, or places that weren't listed in any guidebook. For many European tourists, these small interactions became some of the most memorable moments of their trip. They weren't long conversations. Sometimes they lasted less than a minute. But they made everyday life feel surprisingly welcoming. Many visitors admitted they slowly became more comfortable starting conversations themselves. Instead of avoiding small talk, they found themselves smiling back, asking questions, and enjoying those brief moments of connection with people they had never met before. Of course, every person is different. Not every interaction was the same, but many travellers said they appreciated how open people often seemed, especially in restaurants, shops, hotels, and local neighbourhoods. By the end of their trip, something unexpected had happened. The casual conversations they had once found unusual had become something they looked forward to. Then they returned home. The next time they stood quietly in a checkout line or rode public transport without anyone speaking, some couldn't help but remember those everyday conversations they had experienced in America. Sometimes it wasn't the famous landmarks that stayed with them the longest. It was a simple smile, a friendly greeting, or a conversation that lasted only a few moments. Because those small interactions had made a foreign country feel just a little more familiar. And while friendly strangers helped many visitors feel welcome, the next surprise wasn't about the people. It was about the service they received almost everywhere they went. 5. Customer service. After experiencing America's friendly conversations with complete strangers, many European visitors noticed something else. The service. Whether they were checking into a hotel, ordering food, shopping for clothes, or asking for directions inside a store, many were surprised by how eager employees often seemed to help. Before visiting America, some Europeans expected customer service to feel overly enthusiastic. They had heard stories about waiters introducing themselves, cashiers asking how their day was going, and staff checking in several times during a meal. Some wondered if it might feel awkward, or even a little too much. But after experiencing it themselves, many found their opinion began to change. Restaurant servers often stopped by to make sure everything was all right. Store employees offered to help customers find what they were looking for. Hotel staff recommended local attractions and restaurants. Even returning an item or asking a simple question often felt quick and straightforward. For many visitors, these small interactions made everyday tasks feel surprisingly easy. Instead of searching through a large store alone, someone often appeared to offer assistance. Instead of wondering who to ask, there was usually an employee nearby willing to help. Of course, experiences varied from place to place. Not every visit was the same. But many European tourists said they appreciated how customer service often focused on making things as convenient as possible. By the end of their trip, what had first seemed overly friendly simply felt normal. Some even admitted they began expecting that level of service everywhere they went. Then they returned home. The next time they waited for assistance, or searched a store without finding anyone to ask, some couldn't help comparing it with what they had experienced in America. It wasn't about grand gestures. It wasn't about luxury. It was the small, everyday moments, the helpful recommendations, the quick assistance, and the feeling that someone was genuinely trying to make their experience a little easier. Sometimes, it's those ordinary moments that leave the biggest impression. And while helpful service surprised many European visitors, the next thing they discovered made everyday life even more convenient. It didn't involve restaurants or hotels. It was something they noticed late at night. 24-hour convenience. After experiencing America's customer service, many European visitors noticed something they hadn't expected. The day didn't seem to end. Back home, many people are used to planning around opening hours. Supermarkets may close earlier in the evening. Pharmacies often have limited hours. And in many places, finding a late-night meal can be difficult once the evening rush is over. So when many Europeans arrived in America, they were surprised by just how much was still open after dark. Hungry at 10 o'clock? There was probably a restaurant nearby. Need medicine late at night? Many pharmacies were still open. Craving a snack after an evening out? Convenience stores, diners, and drive-thrus were often just a short drive away. For many tourists, it wasn't simply about shopping. It was about flexibility. There was no pressure to rush through the day. If plans changed, it usually wasn't a problem. Forgot to buy something? You could often go back later. Finished sightseeing late? Finding dinner still felt easy. Many visitors admitted they quickly stopped checking store hours before heading out. They simply assumed something nearby would still be open. By the end of the trip, many realized they had started taking it for granted, being able to grab food after midnight, pick up essentials whenever they needed them, or simply enjoy the freedom of not constantly watching the clock. Then they returned home. The first evening they found themselves standing outside a shop that had already closed. Many couldn't help smiling, because they suddenly remembered just how convenient everyday life had felt in America. Sometimes, the things you miss most aren't the famous attractions. They're the little conveniences that quietly make each day easier. And while America's late-night convenience surprised many European visitors, the next experience completely changed the way some of them looked at sports. 3. The atmosphere at American sporting events. After discovering how convenient everyday life could be in America, many European visitors experienced something they never expected. Even if they weren't sports fans, they found themselves caught up in the atmosphere. Before arriving in the United States, many tourists assumed American sports would be difficult to understand. After all, the rules were different, the traditions were unfamiliar, and many had never watched an NFL, NBA, MLB, or college football game before. Some only attended because a friend suggested it. Others simply wanted to experience something uniquely American. But the moment they arrived, they realized the game itself was only part of the experience. Hours before kickoff, parking lots were already full. Families gathered around barbecue grills. Friends played games. Music filled the air. Fans wearing their team's colours welcomed complete strangers into conversations. For many European visitors, it felt less like attending a sporting event and more like spending the day at a huge community celebration. Then came the stadium. The size, the lights, the music, the giant video screens. the player introductions. Every moment felt carefully designed to build excitement. Even visitors who barely understood the rules often found themselves cheering alongside thousands of passionate fans. Basketball games offered constant entertainment. Baseball games moved at a slower pace, giving families time to relax, eat, and enjoy the atmosphere. College football surprised many visitors with traditions that felt just as important as the game itself. And for those lucky enough to experience the World Cup in America, many discovered something truly unique. Supporters from dozens of different countries filled the same streets, restaurants, and fan zones. American fans, European fans, South American fans, Asian fans, all celebrating together. The tournament became more than football. It became an opportunity to experience American hospitality while sharing the excitement with people from around the world. By the time the final whistle blew, many visitors realized they hadn't just watched a game. They had experienced an event, something much bigger than the final score. Then they returned home. And long after the match was over, they still remembered the atmosphere, the energy, the music, the crowds, and the feeling of being part of something shared by tens of thousands of people. Sometimes, the best part of a sporting event isn't who wins, it's simply being there. And while America's unforgettable stadium atmosphere surprised many visitors, the next thing they discovered was even harder to ignore, because it appeared every time food arrived at the table. Portion sizes.
Okay, well, we clearly didn't know the sizes of pizza because we ordered 7 of them.
Thank you. Enjoy, guys.
After experiencing the incredible atmosphere at American sporting events, many European visitors encountered another surprise. This one arrived at the dinner table. Before visiting America, many had already heard the jokes. The portions are enormous. You'll never finish your meal. Everything is supersized. Some assumed those stories had to be exaggerated, until they sat down for their first meal. The waiter placed the plate on the table, and many couldn't help but laugh. The burger seemed bigger than expected. The fries covered half the plate. Even a simple soft drink looked much larger than what they were used to back home. For many visitors, it was their first real glimpse of just how generous American portions could be. At first, it almost felt impossible to finish. Many admitted they quickly realized they had ordered far more food than they actually needed. But after a few meals, something unexpected happened. They discovered that many Americans don't expect you to eat everything in one sitting. Taking leftovers home is completely normal. Restaurant staff will often offer a takeaway box without anyone even asking. Suddenly, those huge portions made a little more sense. One dinner could easily become tomorrow's lunch. Sometimes, even another dinner. For travelers trying different restaurants every day, it also meant sharing meals became common. Friends ordered different dishes. Everyone sampled a little of everything, turning every meal into part of the adventure. Of course, not every restaurant serves giant portions, and healthier options are available almost everywhere. But compared with what many European visitors were used to, the difference was still hard to ignore. By the end of their trip, many admitted they had become surprisingly comfortable with the larger meals. Some even joked that going back home made restaurant portions feel unusually small. It wasn't simply about eating more. It was about the feeling of abundance. The freedom to share, to save leftovers, and to enjoy meals without worrying about every bite. Sometimes the biggest surprises aren't just about size. They're about discovering a completely different way of doing things. And while America's generous portions certainly left an impression, the biggest surprise of all wasn't how much food Americans served. It was the incredible variety waiting to be discovered across the country. America's incredible food variety. After discovering America's generous portion sizes, many European visitors realized something even more surprising. It wasn't just how much food Americans served, it was how many different kinds of food there were. Before visiting the United States, some imagined every meal would be burgers, fries, and fast food. Movies and television had created a familiar image. Drive-thrus, cheeseburgers, pizza, soft drinks. Many assumed that was the full picture. But after travelling across America, they quickly discovered a country whose food was far more diverse than they had ever imagined. One city introduced them to authentic Mexican tacos. Another became famous for slow-smoked Texas barbecue. In New Orleans, they discovered Cajun flavors unlike anything they had tasted before. Along the East Coast, fresh seafood became part of the experience. In New York, it was pizza, bagels, and delicatessens. Travel further west, and entirely different local favorites began to appear. For many visitors, it felt like every region had its own identity, its own traditions, its own signature dishes. But what surprised many Europeans even more was America's international food scene. In many cities, it was possible to enjoy authentic Korean barbecue, Vietnamese pho, Japanese ramen, Indian curries, Greek restaurants, Italian family-owned cafes, Middle Eastern cuisine, and so much more. Sometimes all within the same neighborhood. Many realized that America's food culture wasn't built around just one tradition. It had been shaped by generations of people bringing recipes, flavors, and cooking styles from around the world. For curious travelers, every meal became another opportunity to discover something new. Some admitted they had planned to eat burgers every day. Instead, they found themselves trying cuisines they had never even heard before. By the end of the trip, many looked back and realized that food had become one of the highlights of their entire American experience. Not because every meal was enormous, not because every restaurant was famous, but because every city seemed to tell its own story through food, and every new destination offered another reason to sit down at the table. When they finally returned home, many found themselves remembering those meals long after the holiday had ended. Sometimes it was the smoky barbecue. Sometimes it was the tacos from a small roadside stand. Sometimes it was a family-owned restaurant they discovered by accident. Whatever it was, those memories stayed with them. Because in the end, the biggest surprise wasn't that America had great food. It was discovering just how much variety existed beyond the stereotypes. And perhaps that's what this entire journey was really about. Many Europeans arrived believing they already knew what America would be like. But after driving its highways, meeting its people, experiencing its cities, and tasting its food, they left with a very different perspective. Not because every expectation was wrong, but because some experiences can only be understood by seeing them for yourself. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's countdown, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Worldviews America, and let us know in the comments which of these surprises do you think would change your mind the most. We'll see you in the next one.